Hey guys, so in this quick tip, I want to show you the importance of naming your files and keeping your layers organized when you're doing a pretty complicated build. In my job, I design movie posters, so there's quite a bit of compositing and layers that go into these files. Maybe not straight when you're doing straight photography. Maybe you don't do so many layers or builds don't get quite as complicated, but they can, depending on how much compositing, how much color correcting, how much shifting you can do. So I kind of wanted to show the importance of it by showing a movie poster I did for The Raven, starring John Cusack. And unfortunately, I can't show you the images that were used before the final product because those images belong to the studio and I don't have the rights to show you those images individually, but I can show you the layers while you can see the final product, because that's kind of the final piece that was done and sold and you can see in theaters and stuff. But I will be able to show you my layers, but you will not be able to see the actual images, so there'll always be the composite image on top of all the layers, so you won't be able to see them. Again, I apologize, but I don't own those images, and I don't have the rights to show you those images because they're owned by the studio. But for the purpose of this quick tip, this will be just fine, and I'll be able to show you my layers and why it's important to keep them very organized. So, how do I organize my layers? Most of the time, I will organize my layers into folders. And depending on how complicated the build is, there'll be more folders, less folders, and stuff like that. But typically I'll always have a background folder, and then kind of somewhere in here I will have a art folder. I call it an art folder. Here I used images and Poe because I have the composite images, the gallery of images behind these. I can show you here. I have these images back here in one kind of folder, and then I have John Cusack as Edgar Allan Poe in another folder because he was quite a complicated build himself. And then I usually, after getting that, let me pause this for a second actually. About that, I thought I heard somebody at the door, but it wasn't anybody. So where was I? I was deciding, I was telling you that I usually have within these folders right here kind of my art, and then above that I'll have all my effects, my overall effects folder, which basically is any effect that I do to the poster that's an overall effect. Individual effects to certain layers I will do wherever that layer is. Above that, I usually have what's a type layer, where basically all of the typography and the layout of the typography will go. And then above that, usually we have our template, which I can turn on right now. And basically what our templates are when you're designing a movie poster, you have certain things that are required. And basically what it is a trim, which is where the poster's actually going to be where the poster's actually going to be cut. And then you usually have bleed. In this poster, it's not so important because the bleed is pretty much black, but you can see that these wings, actually, they're probably, let me get rid of the crop. You can see that the wings maybe go out a little bit into the bleed. So basically what you want to do is you want to make your art all the way out so that when it crops, there's no art missing. And then there's another thing that we use in movie posters is this green line is our type safety. And basically that means that no type can fall outside of this green line. And it's mainly because it's when movie posters are displayed in movie theaters, the case that the movie poster is in has a frame around, a black matte frame. So if you put stuff outside of this frame box, it will get cut off in those boxes. So we typically tend to, even though I was pushing the limits on how close I wanted to get to this line on this one, we can't go past those lines. So now let me actually get into this, why it's important to name these files and stuff. Why it's important to keep them organized. because you'll see it's a pretty complicated build. Just for my background layer, I used a bunch of layers, and unfortunately I can't show you the layers individually because of, restrictions I already talked about, but, I have my black layer, which is just a background, and then I have this layer with a mask that basically this layer was just creating this kind of ground plane, most of this ground plane, and, most of our files are either named for the image number where it came from or just a name that will kind of tell me what that is. But most of the times we'll do, if the image comes from somewhere and we have to reference it for later use, we'll always put that number on there. Now, for example, the next layer, it's called Cobblestone's Horizontal Motion Blur of the same image. So basically what I'm telling myself is I used this image number of cobblestones and I added a horizontal blur to create this this kind of horizontal, almost wet effect. And then painted light, I usually do whenever I'm painting lights and darks and I want to add some of this atmosphere behind him here. That's what those are. Smoke is, in this case, I use smoke as a slight texture to break up some of the monotony of these wings. It just kind of adds a little bit of organic lights and darks by using a smoke texture. The wings, obviously, those are the wings that I had created, or actually, I believe we got those from stock imagery, and so. That's basically what that layer is. And that comprised most of my background layers. Now, for the images themselves. So these images right here all comprise the images inside or behind Poe. The girl, the guy, the knives, the headstones, the little guy with the skull head, the guy getting the guy getting cut in half by the pendulum, and the old guy right here. So basically, if you look at these, since these images mostly come from the photography that were provided by the unit photographer on set or the studio, they're all named pretty much where those referencing those shot numbers from the original selection. And for example, you can also sometimes I'll name my files file number. And then I'll tell myself, girl crying. So I can reference, so when I go back and I'm looking through, hundreds of layers, I can kind of pretty quickly find the shot of her. In this build, I ended up using a lot of just the numbers because it was, even though it's a complicated build with a lot of layers, I was able to organize it simply by using these folders. And I know that these images basically just comprise in here, so I only have 11, 12 images to go through. So I organize them in folders instead of too much detailed naming, but you should really try to name your files as detailed as possible, your layers. And then Poe, if you can see, it looks like it's just a simple image of John Cusack running, but he was comprised of quite a bit of layers just to make him work. Everything from a stock shot that we used, from Shutterstock, to this Poe copy usually ends up being the shadow down here, which is flipped over and then created a shadow. I didn't name this layer, so I don't really know what that is, but I'm sure this looks like just a little bit of light glow behind him. This Shutterstock, what happens is this image actually was created by using an image of John Cusack as Alexander Poe with legs from a stock shot so that he looked more like he was running, and it gave it a little more energy with the lean and stuff. And usually this is probably the shot of John Cusack as Poe, his face, and usually we'll add a little bit of this probably darkened his suit, even though you can still see a little bit of the detail in his suit. I wanted it to be quite a silhouette so that it was a really kind of pronounced, iconic image. And adding hair. Whenever I put adding hair, basically what happens is when you cut these guys out, when you cut the mask out to cut him out so he's transparent in the background, A lot of times I'll paint hair back in to make it look a little more realistic. This is a low-res copy, so you can't really see that detail in there, but when you get into high-res imagery, you really can't see that detail, and you go into the when you go to a printed piece and stuff, and it's, you know, these posters are printed pretty big, so the resolution's got to be pretty high. Now, my overall effects layers, in this case, I only have a couple of effects layers, which is this gradient map, which gives me this. It's a gradient map that I created, which is a red to orangey to dark to light. You know, it's just quite a bit of colors in this gradient map. Let's see if I can actually show you. Windows. If I double click it, see, so it's this kind of colored gradient map, which is basically taking, you know, black to an orange, dark orange to an orange to a yellow to a white, and it's adding those tones to the overall luminosity of this image. Let's get rid of that. Okay, and then I added an overall texture just to give it a little bit more organic feel, and you can kind of see this texture in here. Unfortunately, this is a low-res image that I use for this, but you can see a little bit of the texture in here and a little bit of that kind of grimy texture that I added on top of it. And then the typography is basically just what it is. For this one, I actually flattened the typography just so that it, you know, we wouldn't have any to deal with font issues when transferring over, but most of the time this will be actually live type. Anywhere from the logo, which, you know, we created, to basically, you know, adding all of this type and the billing. The pedigree, the copy, you know, the actor. In this case, we even added the is Edgar Allan Poe because the studio asked us to do it. And that's basically kind of what I wanted to talk to you about and why it's important to really name your files and keep your layers organized on complicated builds. And it's real easy not to do it, especially when you're not doing a lot of layers. When you're doing a couple of layers, people say, there's no point. You know, there's only a couple of layers. But if you get into the habit of really naming your layers, it'll save you a lot of time later on in really complicated builds. That's all I wanted to say for this quick tip, and I hope it helps you and you enjoyed it. And keep looking at my YouTube channel. I'll be bringing more stuff, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you very much.